I'm really tired of not teaching things. I've been wanting to make a voiceover for quite a while, but I've really been quite shy about it. So this is the first time I've really been attempting to do so on YouTube. Alright, so I'm in an SPOP server that does these monthly screenshot redraw events, and I got really excited because apparently September is Adora month, and these were the options. I have to admit, this crystal background Adora gave me some really good ideas that I'll probably pursue later, but I kind of knew the transformation Shiro would get picked. So there's a couple of different schools of thought when it comes to screenshot redraws. The first is drawing for understanding. Most beginner artists start off by studying. A screenshot already has the composition figured out, the characters are already drawn. All you have to do is draw what you see. This is an excellent exercise when you're breaking down styles, or when posing is still new and confusing to you. The second is using a screenshot as a launching point. So for this project, this is kind of where I'm coming from. I use screenshots as reference a lot of the time, but usually I have somewhere else that I'm trying to take the final thing. The goal here is not to reproduce, but to make something new, or in this case, a little bit better. Let's get started. I start simple. I kind of have to. The basic principle is working from general to specific. I can't tell you how many times I've ruined a sketch by burrowing into details too soon. My first priority is establishing locations and the angle of the hips and the shoulders, since the original seemed a bit disjointed in that area. I'm turning the hips gently to create a better flow with the chest, and I'm using her hair to further exaggerate that flow. From here, I'm just clarifying my lines a little bit and getting the sketch ready for inking. Inking is just about my least favorite part of a drawing. It's always the sink or swim moment for any of my drawings, and a lot of my pieces die in this stage. I don't have too much advice for inking in this particular video, except to keep your wrist loose and work with big, long strokes first. Finished inks will almost always look worse than your sketch, just as a warning. Since my inks are never perfect, I can't rely on a flood selection style of coloring, so I do this instead. My goal is a flat block under the lines so I can see what needs clarifying against my background. Have you ever done your colors on a light background and then it looked really awful on a dark background? Doing your colors on a dark background can fix this altogether. The rest of this is just coloring book style flats. I do two types of shading. A flat cell shading, which is just a color on multiply, and a sort of textural shading where I give additional clarification and detail to a certain area, like the hair or her armor. For cell shading, I just use a purpley blue on multiply. I haven't talked too much about composition in this video because it's a really abstract concept, but I'm using the shadows to add emphasis and contrast rather than being strictly realistic with them. I've already knocked in a glow around a door first, since I can see that's a pretty important part of the screenshot I want to keep. The color here isn't important right now, just the value. You can see here I started messing around with some cloud shapes, but none of them turned out exactly how I wanted them to. This is another note about composition. They ended up being too contrasty and too distracted. That's kind of a hard lesson. You can make some really good elements, but they don't necessarily belong in your composition. This is happening way later than it should, but here I'm cropping for composition. So I'm closing in on the last little bit of this piece, and there's just a few things left, the stars and then some final adjustments. With the stars, it's important to think organically, clump them together and use varying sizes. I'll be softening some of them on the outer edges to keep most of the interest and texture near Adora. To make them glow, duplicate the layer and blur them, just a little. I like Gaussian blur. Then set the blur layer to add, and adjust the opacity until you find something you like. At the very end here, I've kind of decided I didn't really like where the mouth is positioned, so I'm gonna go ahead and knock it out and redraw it again. Here I'm just taking the same line art brush and cleaning up just a few areas. It really doesn't mean much at this point. And that's it. Here she is compared with the original. Thanks so much for watching.